The Arab and Muslim American community is warning that President Biden will pay a price for his handling of the crisis in the Gaza Strip. In 2020, Joe Biden won the state of Michigan with a narrow margin over Republican opponent Donald Trump of more than 150,000 votes. The two groups of voters who helped him pull ahead in Michigan and other key battleground states, including Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, are Muslim Americans and Arab Americans. Battleground states do not lean Democratic or Republican, they play an important role in deciding the presidential race. Now, 4 years later, as Biden and Trump move toward a rematch in November, the Democratic president faces a growing risk from a backlash from those same voters. Many people are trying to find ways to damage his election efforts. Angered by America's support for Israel in its unprecedented campaign in Gaza, many Arab and Muslim American voters said they would stay away from this year's elections. Arab and Muslim communities said they have called on the Biden administration to speak up and stop the bombardment in the Gaza Strip, but to no avail. Washington's current stance makes them regret voting for President Biden in the past. Communities in Dearborn, Detroit, and other major cities with large Arab American populations successfully lobbied local council leaders to introduce a unilateral resolution demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. Mai El-Sudani, director of the Washington-based Tahrir Institute for Middle East Policy, TIMP, said local resolutions are only symbolic but are a sign of public concerns and priorities. America Today. It provides a platform for people to explain why this issue is important and how it affects them or their families, she said. Local councils have the ability to bring together like-minded people to create a greater sense of urgency and pressure on foreign policymakers to reconsider their approach. Some Arab voters are choosing not to participate in state primaries and even general elections in November, if there is no ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. Community leaders in Minnesota launched the Quit Biden campaign last October. Others said they plan to write Freedom for Palestine messages on ballots. In the Democratic primary in Michigan on February 27, many Arab voters did not check President Biden's name but selected the uncommitted box on the ballots. This choice indicates that the voter supports the party but is not attached to any of the candidates listed on the ballot. Uncommitted votes will not be counted for President Biden. Zaydan, who is of Palestinian descent, chose uncommitted when voting in Michigan and confirmed she will not vote for President Biden in November. She is forming a group to urge others to do so. There are about 3.5 million people of Arab descent in the U.S., accounting for about 1% of the population. About 65% are Christian, 30% are Muslim, and a small number are Jewish. According to Youssef Chowhoud, a researcher on race and religion at Christopher Newmark University, CNU, Virginia, these groups tend to vote based on different interests, but they are completely in agreement on their needs: demand a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. The city of Dearborn, Michigan, is home to the largest Arab American community in the country, accounting for more than 40% of the city's population. Georgia, Pennsylvania, Florida, and Virginia also have large Arab communities. Georgia, Michigan, and Pennsylvania will be battleground states in November, where the gap in support for Democrats and Republicans is negligible and only a small fluctuation can change the final result. The votes of the Arab community created a turning point in the tight White House race in 2020. Mr. Biden led Mr. Trump with 154,000 votes in Michigan, most of which belonged to the Arab community, accounting for 5% of the votes. Michigan is home to about 240,000 Arab Americans. In Georgia, Mr. Biden won with a difference of less than 12,000 votes. The state is home to more than 57,000 Arab Americans. However, growing discontent among these communities has made the Democratic Party no longer the choice of many Arab voters, whether Christian or Muslim, for the first time in 26 years. President Biden's support rate among the Arab community has decreased from 59% in 2020 to 17% in 2023. There are about 4.5 million Muslim Americans, and the majority of them, about 3.5 million, are not of Arab descent. Most are of Pakistani and Indian descent. But Muslim communities of non-Arab origin, which often vote for Democrats, are also losing faith in President Biden. About 1 million Muslims voted in 2020 and 80% of them chose President Biden. According to the Council on American Islamic Relations, CAIR, approximately 2 million Muslims are registered to vote in the 2024 election. This time, however, only 5% of Muslim Americans say they will vote for Mr. Biden in November, according to a poll conducted by the Muslim activist group MJIJ. Muslims in the U.S. are concentrated mainly in New York, California, Illinois, New Jersey, Texas, Florida, Ohio, Virginia, Georgia, and Michigan. Other communities could also hurt President Biden at the ballot box. Polls conducted by the Pew Research Center show that 40% of Americans disapprove of the Biden administration's response to the conflict, especially young people. Biden's campaign has tried to show that the president is disappointed with the situation in Gaza to convince voters to side with him. NBC last month quoted a source as saying that President Biden expressed dissatisfaction with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu due to Tel Aviv's unwillingness to agree to a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. The White House boss also told reporters at a press conference on February 8 that Israel's response in Gaza has exceeded the limit. However, Washington has so far continued to support Israel's campaign. In mid-February, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Linda Thomas-Greenfield was the only person to oppose and veto a resolution proposed by Algeria calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. She explained that this could jeopardize ongoing negotiations to rescue Israeli hostages still held by Hamas, and that an immediate ceasefire would derail U.S. efforts to build peace long-term in the region. In January, the U.S. Senate approved an additional aid package worth $14 billion for Israel. According to the Council on Foreign Relations, Israel receives the largest amount of aid from the U.S., about $3.3 billion per year. Almost all of this money was used for military activities. Some analysts point out that the Muslim and Arab community only accounts for about 2 to 3% of the total number of voters, but their turning their backs on Mr. Biden could cause President Biden to lose his advantage in key areas. Battleground state, and just a small difference is enough to make a decisive difference, clearing the way for Mr. Trump to enter the White House. There is reason to believe that President Biden is facing the risk of losing more than 50% of the votes he received in 2020 from Arabs and Muslims, Chauhoud said. He can't rely on their votes anymore. This does not mean we should blame Muslims, Chauhoud added. They've been warning about what they would do for months. If Democrats really cared about stopping a second Trump presidency, they would have done something different.